Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin for our weekly Public Affairs Forum. This forum is free and open to the public and occurs most Sundays at noon. You can find out more information on our website at austinuu.org. Today I would like to welcome Heather Busby from NARAL Pro-Choice Texas. She is the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Texas. Prior to being at NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, Heather was an assistant Travis County attorney. She was also a founding board member of the Lilith Fund and served on the boards of the National Network of Abortion Funds and the Law Students for Reproductive Justice. She earned her BA in anthropology from the University of Texas and got a law degree from the South Texas College of Law in Houston, where she was president of the ACLU. She also won the LBJ Civil Rights Award for her work in helping victims of human trafficking while interning at the South Texas Civil Rights Project. Heather loves volunteering in her community. She's provided pro bono legal assistance and taught ESL to immigrants, served as a mentor to middle school students, and worked the hotlines at a domestic violence shelter. She lives in Central Austin with her husband. Please join me in welcoming Heather Busby.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you all for having me here today. I'd like to share a little bit more about me to set the stage for my talk today. I've been the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Texas for almost 3 years now. And I came full circle to this job. I actually worked for the same organization. It was my first grown-up job right out of college after I graduated and spent a little time exploring South America. And that is where I first learned about abortion funds and was introduced to that world and found great meaning in providing direct financial assistance for people seeking abortions. I remember my boss at the time saying she wished we could come up with something better than pro-choice. And I remember thinking that the heart and soul of this movement was really in the work that I was doing, speaking to people every day who needed abortions. And I thought that if an anti-choice person were to spend a day on an abortion funding hotline, they'd probably have a change of heart. Well, at least some of them anyway, not all. Before this job, I was an assistant county attorney, and I got protective orders for people who were experiencing family violence, stalking, and sexual assault. I spent every day listening to some of the worst stories of humanity, the unimaginable horrors that people do to each other. In the evenings, I worked the abortion fund hotline, or dedicated my time to one of the countless tasks that go along with being on a working board for an organization without any paid staff. And in whatever spare time I had left, I did pro bono immigration work. I experienced the joys of getting U visas for survivors of domestic violence. I worked with the Anti-Human Trafficking Coalition, and I spent 2 years working on a domestic violence asylum case, only to have my heart ripped apart when the judge denied the relief. Through these experiences and others in my life, I've come to have a profound appreciation for how access to abortion and contraception, knowledge about biology and sexual health, intersects with so many other social justice issues. I want that every pregnant person has the support they need during their pregnancy and afterward, whether that afterward is a miscarriage, elective or medically necessary abortion, or a birth, and that every child born into this world is given love and everything that they need to flourish. This is why I dedicate myself to this work, the work of reproductive freedom. And please enjoy this picture of my dogs and my cute nephews. I'm your abortion friend. Who knows what I'm talking about? Anyone ever heard this? Is anyone in the room somebody's abortion friend? You know, the person who's really involved in abortion rights, knows all about the issue, the people turn to when they have questions or if they need an abortion. Part of being that abortion friend or knowing one is the willingness to engage in conversation. As one of those designated abortion friends, I'm here to tell you that we cannot do this alone. We are not enough, and we need everyone to help us. Why? Well, for one, let's look at where we are with the state of reproductive rights and access in Texas and also with the nation. In Texas, we're facing more attacks on access to the full range of reproductive health care than ever before. In Texas, we haven't had Medicaid funding for abortion since the late 1970s, when the Hyde Amendment was passed at the federal level in 1976. So to be clear, not a single public dollar has gone towards abortion in the state of Texas since the 70s, with the exception of a short amount of time where Travis County provided that care for its residents. Then we saw the abortion affiliate ban crop up starting in 2011. This was our Texas legislature's attack on Planned Parenthood, but it took many other family planning clinics in its wake. First, there were drastic cuts to family planning funding and shifting funding over into what they call expanded primary health care, away from specialized knowledge in family planning and the specialized providers who've been trusted to provide this care for so long. And this last legislative session, we saw that abortion affiliate ban expanded yet again when the legislature cut funding for Planned Parenthood to provide breast and cervical cancer screenings. And I would not be surprised to see it expanded yet again when our legislature comes back in 2017. A couple of weeks ago, our governor announced his new pro-life agenda. There's language in there that troubles me, language that hints that perhaps the legislature might come after local funding for family planning, just like they did with abortion funding in Travis County. I'm also gravely concerned with where teenagers are going to be once January 1st hits, when a new law goes into effect that drastically reduces their access to the only safety net they have, when they don't have parents involved in their lives, either through they've been orphaned, they've been neglected, abandoned, or they're in an abusive home. And these teens are going to face extreme obstacles in accessing the courts and getting a judicial bypass when they're pregnant and wish to access an abortion. We've seen huge increases in what we call targeted regulations at abortion providers, or TRAP laws. These laws are intended to chip away at access and to force providers out of business because many of the regulations are just too onerous to keep up with. We've seen that in the form of ambulatory surgical center requirements, or many hospitals, a provision, a law that's part of the law that's currently being challenged in the courts and is waiting to be heard by the United States Supreme Court, as well as admitting privileges for physicians and regulations on how physicians can provide abortion with pills. We've seen that in the form of mandatory training and signage, reporting, and countless other regulations that take time away from abortion care providers, spending time with their patients, counseling them, making sure that they get the best care necessary, and instead complying with mountains and mountains of paperwork and inspections. We've seen a gross interference in the doctor-patient relationship. With the Women's Right to Know Act, doctors are forced to read medically and scientifically inaccurate information to their patients, and they have to perform a sonogram on their patient regardless of the patient's wishes or needs, and say certain things regardless of the individualized situation of the patient. We're seeing, of course, these attacks on family planning and the shifting of funds. And meanwhile, crisis pregnancy centers, the religiously affiliated anti-abortion centers that exist in order to try and prevent people from accessing abortion care, are getting more and more of your tax dollars. This legislative session, they were allocated $9.1 million per year of money that is not accountable. There's no reporting to the public as to how that money is spent. For too long, we've been going about this in a misguided way, focusing on a legal right that only exists for the privileged. Meanwhile, access to reproductive health care has been chipped away more and more year after year for the vast majority of people. It's just become more and more difficult to access. And we've all been silenced. We've been made to internalize the shame and stigma of abortion, enough even among our most staunchest supporters. We've been made to feel like our values are not moral, that somehow we have to whisper, abortion, or speak in euphemisms. It's pervasive. We hear it every day, everywhere. This is abortion stigma. The Sea Change program, which is an organization designed to help chip away at this stigma, explains what abortion stigma is very well. It's defined as a shared understanding that abortion is morally wrong and or socially unacceptable. And where does that leave the rest of us who don't agree with that? Unfortunately, this is pervasive. We see it all throughout society. In the media, when they grasp on stereotypes or fail to report objectively, or engage in what I call false objectivity, where they have the he said, she said, and without checking facts or even consulting medical science, they'll report what an anti-abortion leader says without any context given or any accuracy. We see it in policy, in the very toxic discourse around limiting abortion access and discrimination against abortion providers. We hear it in the committee meetings, in the state and federal level. We hear it in floor debate. We see it in institutions, hospitals that refuse to provide abortions or won't grant admitting privileges to doctors who perform abortions, and other doctors who are too afraid to stand up for their colleagues because they'll lose their own jobs. We see it in communities, in the churches that preach against abortion while people sitting in their pews have had abortions themselves. In our relationships, when we're afraid to tell others about our abortions or speak openly about our views and discuss this issue. As individuals, we've been made to feel ashamed to admit we've had abortions, or we've been made to feel guilty when we have an abortion and it turns out we don't regret it. We hear it in speeches from politicians, even the ones on our side, like Bernie Sanders describing abortion as a painful and difficult choice, and Hillary Clinton saying it should be safe, legal, and rare. It's imperative that we start now to change the culture around abortion, to stop being silenced, to be proud to believe that each person should be able to make decisions about their family and their health, to support everyone in their reproductive decision-making, no matter what those decisions are. We do this by reclaiming our values and embracing the reality that abortion is a moral choice. Recently, I read an article in Salon.com from a writer, Valerie Tirico, who writes about this morality and how we can reclaim it. She writes that the choice to bring a new life, or not, is tied to the biggest questions we face. Questions about meaning and purpose, values, faith, love, goals and dreams, and letting go of one potential life to claim another. Pregnant people terminate pregnancies in spite of enormous cultural weight of shame and stigma surrounding abortion, because they are reaching for a better future, whether for themselves, their children and families, their communities, or even the broader web of life. And those who provide abortion care, again, despite stigma and threats, often do so because of their own deepest values, including compassion, respect, and service. We argue about whether abortion is morally forbidden and should be illegal, or is acceptable and should be allowed, and under what circumstances. But when people choose abortions, or medical professionals provide them, they are almost always operating on the positive side of the moral spectrum. People experience their own abortions not merely as acceptable, but as prudent, realistic, wise, empowering, responsible, and even loving, a necessary, if sometimes complicated and painful step, to something better. In other words, our public dialogue about abortion is utterly misaligned with the lived experiences of abortion patients and providers. The author goes on to recommend that we move from talking about rights to families and flourishing and start discussing what comes after an abortion. The story of someone's abortion is significant because of what came after it. Who did you become in the years since, and in what positive ways did abortion impact your life? Almost 20 years ago, I had an abortion in the clinic that was located right next to this building, Austin Reproductive Services. I was approximately 8 weeks along in the pregnancy, the result of a broken condom and then failed emergency contraception. I tried. From the second I saw the plus sign on the stick, I knew what I wanted to do. I had made the appointment, and at the clinic I received compassionate care and counseling. The procedure was quick, and afterwards everything was fine. I graduated college because I had an abortion. I went on to law school, in part because of that abortion. I was not ready to parent then, and I've since realized that I don't want to be a parent ever in my life. I don't regret a thing, because having the ability to access safe, legal abortion care allowed me to do what I really wanted with my life, to help others, to tackle causes, to take on social justice, and to find a way to make a difference in the world, and I'm proud of that. Yes, I know people achieve all that I've done and more when they have children, and I have great admiration for them. But I know I made the right decision for my life, and I'm proud of what I've achieved since my abortion. We can claim the moral high ground on abortion. Let's take it back. But in order to do that, we have to use our voices. And we have to have those difficult conversations, even when it's uncomfortable or we're unsure of how the other person is going to take it. So I'm not asking you to just go out and start screaming to the rooftops, abortion, abortion, let's talk about abortion. I'm going to give you some tools to have more productive conversations. And it is a bit of a shift of the conversations that we've had on this debate up until now. And it may not come easy, it may take some practice, but a lot of these have really resonated for me, and I feel that they're a good tool to move forward and have these talks and what we call moving from judgment to empathy. It's a new way of talking about abortion that will hopefully help us better resolve conflict and help those who may have negative opinions about abortion or are conflicted or unsure, those in the middle, to see it differently. So this is the Judgment to Empathy framework that comes out of research and messaging done by the Reproductive Health Technologies Project. It's moving away from that language of who decides. And who decides is not bad terminology, but there are some inherent problems with it. First of all, the focus is on who decides, not politicians. So our focus is on leaving politicians out of these personal decisions. But at the end, it leaves the pregnant person alone in that, alone in their decision. When we add to that who decides and move it into this new framework, we're embracing values of a society that's more supportive and this sort of aspirational society that I hope we all hope to achieve. It's not the same as I would make this decision for myself. It's allowing others to see that there's more to it, that we don't have to judge others. So it's pretty simple. I can accept someone's decision to end a pregnancy, even if I would not make the same decision for myself. It's allowing the listener to think about someone else and to have empathy for them. This phrase was tested among a range of groups, including some of the most staunch anti-abortion people who identified as that. And what they found was this phrase moved people, even the most staunch anti-choice folks, down the spectrum towards more acceptance. So it's very powerful terminology. When you're thinking about how to talk about abortion, you want to lead with your values. Values like respect, empathy, family, and dignity. You want to be clear in those values. And then you want to connect with your listener. Use words like we and us instead of they or them. Acknowledge their beliefs. And know your audience. You want to know who you're speaking to and what your goals are as you move forward. And try not to set up conflict when you bring it up. You want to acknowledge that conflict and then model the value you hope to portray. This gives conflicted audiences a reason to listen to you. Think about it. If someone comes up to you and you feel like they're pushing their own values and their own opinions and judgment upon you, how do you normally react? Usually you shut down or you become defensive. Your defenses go up. But if you actually acknowledge the conflict in a respectful way and then present a solution that is moral, it's a way to achieve this conversation. So this is a tactic we call acknowledge and then assert. So when you're talking with these conflicted audiences, you want to acknowledge the conflict, but not echo back what they're saying. You want to acknowledge it in a way that you could agree with, and then model the value you want to convey and how to resolve the conflict. So here's an example. The conflict is the person you're speaking to says, I think abortion is wrong. You acknowledge that, but you don't want to agree or reinforce that. So you say, I don't think I would choose abortion for myself. Now, maybe you would, but you want to also have them relate to you. So I don't think I would choose abortion for myself, and then you're asserting the solution. Yet I also think we shouldn't tell any pregnant person that they have to stay pregnant. So think about what you have. You have two sides, right? One is saying, abortion is murder, and the other says, my body, my choice. Who do these phrases appeal to, right? Your staunch supporters on either side. Everyone else in the middle is just uncomfortable. And when it comes down to it, they don't want to seem like the murdery type, so they may sway a little more towards the anti-choice. So here are some other phrases you can use to acknowledge and then assert. I'll read them because I don't know if you can read it off the screen. Some of those reasons may not seem right to us, but it is better that each person be able to make their own decision. I believe that abortion ends a life or a potential life, and I still feel I can't make that decision for someone else. Some of us may be uncomfortable with abortion, but children are too important to make people become parents before they're able to provide the appropriate care and love. So this is how we make our messaging more appealing and less strident, and hopefully reach some new audiences so we can continue to grow the majority of folks that we know agree with us. Other tactics make it personal. You want to paint a picture for the listener of the person who and their family who are facing this decision. Who is the pregnant person? What are their circumstances? Who in their lives will they discuss their decision with? And then focus on that individual. You want to avoid talking in generalities and talking about, for example, women in general. You want to talk about a woman, a pregnant person, and give some context of what they're going through. And then focus on respecting and supporting the decisions of others. You want to encourage that empathy. Do you want your cousin who has an unintended pregnancy and says they'd like to get an abortion, do you want your cousin to have to walk through a throng of protesters screaming at them, grabbing at them, showing them bloody pictures of fetuses, and then go into a clinic where the staff is rushed and hurried, under pressure to conform with state mandates and unable to take the time to listen to them? Or do you want them to go into a clinic with warm and welcoming lighting, counselors who have the time to sit down and talk about what's in the heart of that patient? Do you want them to have quality care where they're treated with dignity and respect, and then go home and feel loved and supported? Or would you rather them afterwards feel shame, regret, self-hate? Think about that. How would you want someone else to experience an abortion? How would you want someone who you love to experience abortion? And discuss it that way, creating a role for the listener to come into that story and think about how it feels. So there's some pitfalls you want to avoid. You don't want to say that abortion is wrong, immoral, or bad, or get into a wrong and right dialogue. You don't want to jump straight to facts or policy. this is, in some cases, a relief. I hear from people all the time, well, I don't have conversations about abortion because I don't know all the facts. I don't have all those facts and figures memorized. Don't do that because, what do you do when someone comes at you with a bunch of facts and figures and policy? It's kind of boring, and people don't really listen to it, right? You want to avoid words that invoke stereotypes, particularly around women and sex and sexuality, because there's a lot of really negative stereotypes in society about that. You don't want to set up a conflict. And also you want to avoid falling into the trap of good abortions versus bad abortions. What I mean by that is that you often hear the talk of rape and incest or fetal anomaly or to save the life of the pregnant person. And those are, we're by focusing on the abortions in those circumstances, we're trying to set up a dialogue whereby those are the only acceptable circumstances. Those are the good abortions. But the reality is that most people will have an abortion early in the first trimester for a variety of reasons, and there's nothing wrong with those abortions. Those are not bad abortions, because the reasons behind them are what's good. Those values of people choosing to have an abortion because, for example, something I've heard over my 14 years working abortion fund hotlines again and again, I can't have this baby because it's not fair to my other children. I have to provide for the children that I have and give them everything I can, and we're already struggling. That is a person who's making a decision from a place of great morality. They're making a responsible parenting decision out of love for their children. And how could that possibly be bad? You also don't want to demonize the government's role. We actually do want the government to be positive when it comes to abortion. Focus on politicians, the individuals who are making the bad policy, not the government overall. Some other words to think about, saying we and us instead of they and them. Talking about an individual pregnant person and their family, and stop saying choice. I know this is really hard because for the past 42 years it's been about choice. But really, it's a decision. And this is about the decisions that people make in their lives, their personal decision making. Stop talking about rights. Rights are not resonating with the people we need it to resonate with. This is about the ability to access reproductive health care. It's about that people should have access to clinics and that they need abortions. And it's not a decision about having an abortion. It's really a decision about becoming a parent or adding to your family. These are family decisions. You also want to work on counteracting your audience's impulse to judge. You don't need to go through and list a bunch of reasons why someone would have an abortion. Instead, you want to illustrate their decision-making process. When a pregnant person is deciding whether or not to have an abortion, they'll talk to their loved ones. They'll consult their faith, their family, their friends. They'll weigh this decision along with their other responsibilities in their life. And, of course, you don't want to talk in the generalities. So, what else can you do? How can you get involved? Well, at NARAL Pro-Choice Texas, we're working very hard to change the culture around reproductive health care and get rid of this stigma. We still work in the halls of the Capitol, and we need your support there. Your membership in our organization helps us bring out the big crowds. It helps us in fighting to protect our access to reproductive health care. And we need you now more than ever before because we're facing some significant obstacles. And it's going to get better with your help, but not, in the immediate future. It's going to be a long, hard road, and we need you on it with us. And it's a very tough job. In the political arena, we're fighting for space. We're fighting to, make it clear that reproductive health care matters to other social justice issues. It is tied to immigration. It is tied to economic justice, environmental justice. It is a family decision. It is a decision that is at the core of who we are as people, as parents, as family members. We're also working on local initiatives to increase support for reproductive health care access at the local level. This is great because it's actually proactive policies that'll feed the heart and spirit of our movement as we tackle the long-term challenge of statewide change. And fortunately, we're not alone in this work. We're partnering on long-term strategies for stigma reduction. We're partnering with organizations like the Texas Freedom Network, Whole Woman's Health and Shift, the ACLU of Texas, Progress Texas, Planned Parenthood, the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, the number of abortion funds across the state, and other organizations like the AFIA Center in Dallas. We're creating new and exciting projects like needabortion.org. This is our Know Your Rights campaign that we're working on with the Lilith Fund and Shift, a simple resource for anyone in Texas that isn't sure, even if abortion is legal, to go to and get all the facts, none of the judgment. We're exposing crisis pregnancy centers and their tactics. Our reports are up on txpregnancy.org. You can even listen to some of the shocking things that they say to our investigators and the people that go into their clinics. And we'll keep up the pressure as they get more and more of our tax dollars. We're training the next generation of leaders in this movement, and we're looking at new and creative ways to work on stigma reduction through the Illuminate Reproductive Justice Project. It's an artivism project, art plus activism, that we've partnered with the Texas Freedom Network Education Fund and Shift to bring. We can't do it alone. We're going to need all of you, and we ask you to join us, to work alongside us as we push for a new conversation, a brighter future, and a different way of looking at reproductive health care, including abortion. I know I've given you just a taste today, and there's much more to this, so please feel free to reach out at any time. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter so you can keep up with the latest of our programs and get the latest news. And we're always available as a resource to you. Thank you so much.
And now we have time for some Q&A. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please raise your hand. I will bring you the microphone, and we can get your questions asked. Anybody have a question over here?
I came a few minutes late, so you may have already spoken to this, but the claims of one of the presidential candidates in the recent Republican forum, I mean, does Planned Parenthood have a public announcement rebuttal to that? I mean, it was just outrageous that millions of people think that's reality, that, what happened, and I think it's blatant lie, exaggeration.
Yeah, I mean, they are straight up lying. These videos that have come out that they're basing these falsehoods on and these attacks on Planned Parenthood are been heavily edited. The people behind it have been heavily discredited. They have ties to domestic terrorism, to people who go into doctors' churches and murder them in front of their family and the other parishioners. I think the vast majority of people either have stopped paying attention to these videos and this really ugly rhetoric. Most people trust Planned Parenthood as their provider. They know that they can go to Planned Parenthood for preventative health care, for contraception, for cancer screenings, for pap smears, sexually transmitted infection testing and treatment. And polls have shown that people have a much more favorable opinion of Planned Parenthood and are opposed to this effort to defund it. It's just something that they're feeding to their red meat, that small fraction of Tea Party voters who are moved by this kind of divisive rhetoric. And, it's really unfortunate that that's where we are in our country, and that's why it's imperative for us to speak up and stand for reproductive health care. Because what they're attacking here is not just abortion care, they're attacking contraceptives. They want to take that away too. And that's really frightening, especially for those folks who fought so hard to get access to that care.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the next question, and we have about 25 minutes left. So.
Okay.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for all the work that you do for us, and I just want everybody to be aware that it's because of our work that we are going to the Supreme Court for what the laws that were passed in the Texas legislature, and thank you very much for all your hard work. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't want to take credit where it's not deserved. It's really, the brave providers who brought suit to fight this harmful law, House Bill 2, that was passed in 2013. And the Center for Reproductive Rights and our local council here, Jan Swayfer and Pat O'Connell, are really to thank for this. And as we wait anxiously to see if the Supreme Court will take the case and then what will happen after that, it's really, I thank everyone else for all of the work that everyone does, and all those folks who came out to the Capitol 2 years ago and spoke up.
Add my voice to thank you and your colleagues too for all your fine work. We live in a video society. We live in a time where people are moved by video, and I just wonder if you know that or you carry the message back that making videos about the kind of position of love and morality that you speak of is gotten out to people in a way that people can understand it, or that you can somehow document what's going on in these new no responsibility centers where people are given millions of taxpayer dollars and don't do anything. I mean, is there any way to go in there and visit with these people and get it on tape? I just think those are critical ways to present the kind of intelligence that you're presenting, and hope that you guys can do something like that. Planned Parenthood was just voted in the U.S. Congress to be defunded for a year. Is that true? And what's your take on where that's going?
Yeah, the House of Representatives did vote, I believe it was Friday, to defund Planned Parenthood or remove funding for the services preventative health care services that Planned Parenthood provides. None of those dollars goes towards abortion care. It's all preventative health care. And, we expected that it would pass the House of Representatives because of the makeup. It's very hostile to reproductive rights. And now it'll go to the Senate, where they don't have quite the same makeup. And, of course, President Obama has been very supportive and saying that he would veto that and has been clear there. It's really just about political posturing. It's setting up for an election. And it's disgusting because they're doing this on the backs of people's lives. And to address your comment about videos, we actually are working on an exciting video project that's going to come out at the end of October, early November. Other organizations are also doing video work, and there is a video produced by Vice, which is an HBO show that they did go undercover into a crisis pregnancy center, including one here in Texas, to expose some of the tactics that those centers use.
Can you speak to the information that we can find on your website?
Yeah, so I've put the web addresses up there. ProChoiceTexas.org is our main website, and that's where we have a blog, which is really where you can keep up with the most current information about what's happening. For instance, last week we posted an article about Greg Abbott celebrating that an immigrant woman went into Memorial Hermann Health Clinic in Houston and was arrested for being undocumented. And so our governor thought that was great. We're going to crack down on immigration. But meanwhile, people are afraid to seek health care for painful ovarian cysts for fear of getting arrested in front of their children. And that's just wrong. So, we post information like that, as well as information about our other programs. We also have txpregnancy.org, which is our CPC exposure site, needabortion.org, which is the Know Your Rights site, and illuminaterj.org, which is our Artivism project.
Thank you for your presentation and all that you do. You talked about the importance of terms and growing up with things like abortion rights. You've chosen, could you talk about the origin and why now we use the term reproductive justice?
Right. So reproductive justice is actually a framework. And, this is several-hour training in and of itself. But you have reproductive rights, which is really about protecting the legal right to abortion. But as we've come to learn, accessing abortion doesn't happen in a vacuum in someone's life. It's connected to other areas of their life. And if you can't access that care, it doesn't matter what your legal right is. Then you have reproductive health, which is another framework that's focused on the provision of health care services. where reproductive justice looks more holistically at the entire life of the person and not just the fact that they may be needing an abortion or needing contraception, but also what's going on. Are they able to parent their children in a neighborhood where they feel safe? Are they able to raise their children and not be afraid that they're going to be shot on the playground by a police officer? Are they able to go out into the streets and breathe the air and it's going to be clean and not give them cancer? This is what reproductive justice is. It's a lot more holistic picture and looks at the intersections of our lives and not just one aspect of reproductive health.
Of course, we all know that prevention is more than a pound of cure as a prevention. And I wonder what is the status of reproductive education and access to contraception for teens and information primarily for teens.
Well, here in Texas, school districts are not required to provide sex education, and there's no requirement that that education be medically or scientifically accurate. So we'll hear stories about school districts who bring in guest speakers who reinforce gender stereotypes and, of course, place the burden on a woman to be chaste, and boys will be boys and they'll do what they do and you don't want to tempt them. Those are some of the messages that we hear in some of these programs. And the state law in Texas is that if you do provide sexual education, it has to be majority abstinence-based. So that's not a bad message necessarily, but students also need to get medically accurate information and information about how to prevent pregnancy and STIs. In addition, if you're under 18 in the state of Texas, you have to get parental consent in order to access contraceptives unless you go to a clinic that's receiving federal Title X funding, because it's prohibited by federal law to require that. So there are clinics where young people can go if they don't have a parent in their life that they can turn to. But, we've seen that this is really bad for preventing teen pregnancy, where we have one of the highest rates and one of the very highest repeat teen pregnancy rates in the nation.
I really like the idea of the conversation scripts that you were talking about. And I'm wondering if you have any resources on your website with those scripts. And you mentioned that sometimes you say things that you don't believe, like, I also believe that it is killing a baby, but whatever. And I don't know that I could say that convincingly, and I don't know what would happen if somebody was like, Megan, you don't believe that. Like, it's only good if it's a stranger I'm talking to, right?
Right.
So how do you handle that? Or I wouldn't make the same decision. Like I feel uncomfortable lying because that's what I would be doing, and then I wouldn't know how to follow through with the conversation to make it useful in the end anyway. So do you have resources to help with that?
Yeah, and really these are just examples that I've given. It's not a script that you have to say it that way. Each person has to find for themselves what feels the most natural. I mean, I would have a hard time saying, well, I would say, even if you think that abortion is ending a potential life, or even if that's the proposition, you still want to focus on that modeling of the solution, but we shouldn't. I don't want to make that decision for someone else. And so really, it's really about finding what works best for you and what works best for the audience that you're speaking to.
One thing I wondered about regarding those doctored tapes that were recorded and then, of course, found way too much access in the media and on the internet is that the point they were making is that the fetal tissue was used for something, but you don't really hear anything about what it was used for and what good things come out of it. I think because people are afraid in the media are afraid to talk about that. But I think it would be very useful if that was more known because, for example, when a politician is opposed to LGBT types of issues, as soon as they have someone in their life that's LGBT, their position seems to suddenly switch many times. So if people understood the good that was coming out of the use of fetal tissue, and they could relate it to themselves or a family member, I think that would be an additional reason for people to feel more positive towards it. But I don't hear anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that research, scientific research based off of the use of stem cells from fetal tissue has led to things like the polio vaccine. It is primarily used to research what causes miscarriages and prevent childhood diseases. So really it benefits children and babies. And the fact is no one has an abortion to give up fetal tissue for research. That's just not something that anyone in the history of ever having an abortion has ever thought of. Fetal tissue research does not drive abortions. Cutting off access to family planning creates the circumstances under which someone may need to be accessing abortion care. It's creating more unintended pregnancies. Providing accurate sex education is creating the circumstances under which someone might need an abortion. Fetal tissue it's just a red herring. And if you look at the debate during the Reagan years when the federal law was passed allowing it, it was Republicans talking about how there is good that comes out of this and good that we need in our society. And so, you're right, it's not talked about enough. But at the heart of the debate, it's really just a red herring. It's meant to try and sensationalize what's happening. And this debate is really about they're trying to take away access to reproductive health care.
Every unwanted child has a male component, and I find a huge void in the conversations to boys and men of their responsibility that should be more shared in this reality of the burden that women have to carry with unwanted children and lack of support from the male counterparts. As a room full of men, largely men, vote to take away women's choices in the matter. So I appreciate all your work.
Thank you. And that's an important point that these are not just conversations that women should be having. It's also conversations that everyone should be having. And our male allies in speaking up on this are very important as well.
Heather, maybe you want to do a little bit of a summary of maybe where you see the legal aspects going, where you see Texas going with our laws, and kind of what you see happening in the future.
Yeah, so, it's very important that we all get out the vote next year during the election because we have a legislative session coming up in 2017, and we'll be electing once again the makeup of that. And the problem with Texas is that not enough people are voting. We have the lowest voter turnout in the nation. So really instilling those values of civic engagement and voter participation is an area where we really need to step it up. And I think that once we do that, we'll start seeing improvement in our public health policies, especially around reproductive health. But not just this issue. We'll see improvements in education and, services to mental health care and health care overall. That's my goal and vision for a better Texas. We are going to have some hard fights regardless of what happens at the legislature because we're still going to be in the minority and we still have those extremist politicians who are going to be attacking access to reproductive health care once again, demonizing our abortion care providers and coming after us. So, we're going to need all the support we can get in the next 2 years, people speaking out. Back in 2013, the voices of Texans actually stopped a law from passing, at least for a brief window of time. So it can be done, and I hope that we'll be able to see a brighter future.
Well, Heather, I'd like to thank you for coming. I know you've really been on the front lines of this issue for a long time, and we all really appreciate your work and speaking here today.
Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.